From today, this kitchen is your room. A servant like you does not deserve a bed. The sooner you accept your place in this house, the better for you.
Ada, please forgive me. I made a terrible mistake.
The night Ada was forced to sleep in the kitchen, she cried silently beside the dying fire while the people who stole her father's house slept peacefully upstairs. At just 17, she cooked for them, cleaned for them, ran her late father's shop for them, and handed over every single coin she earned, yet she was treated worse than a servant. But what Mama Oge didn't know was this. Before Ada's father died, he left behind a secret. A secret connected to a man named Daniel. She lay curled up on a thin mat near the kitchen fireplace, her body small and tired, her eyes staring at the ceiling in the dark. The smoke from the dying fire had left black marks on the wall above her head. The floor was cold and hard. Outside, the night was quiet, but inside this house, the house her father built with his own hands, Ada could hear the soft sounds of the stepmother and her daughter sleeping peacefully in their warm beds upstairs. Beds that used to belong to Ada's family. Beds that should have been hers. She was 17 years old, but she felt like an old woman who had carried the whole world on her back for too long. Her hands were rough from washing, scrubbing, and cooking every single day. Her feet were always tired from running the shop from morning until evening, standing for hours, serving customers who smiled at her without knowing what her life looked like behind closed doors. Every coin she collected, every sale she made, every customer she helped, all of it went into the stepmother's hands at the end of the day. Ada never kept a single penny. Not one. But tonight, something made her sit up. Maybe it was the wind pushing through the broken window. Maybe it was the strange feeling a person gets when something big is about to happen, like the air itself changes just before rain. Ada pressed her palm against her chest and breathed slowly. She looked around the dark kitchen and whispered something to herself. It was not a prayer. It was not a cry. It was 3 quiet words she had been repeating for years, like a rope she held onto so she would not fall completely. Papa, help me. Before this emotional story begins, take 1 second to subscribe Red Heart because the ending of Ada's story will leave you speechless. You don't want to miss what happens when the truth finally comes out. It was not always like this. There was a time when this house was the warmest place in the whole village. Poor Elijah was not a perfect man, but he was a good one. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a deep laugh that could fill a whole room and spill outside into the yard. He owned large farmland that his workers tended carefully, and he had a shop in the middle of the village where people came to buy goods, share news, and sometimes just sit and talk. Poor Elijah never turned anyone away. If a man came to him hungry, he was fed. If a young person came with a dream but no money, poor Elijah would listen, really listen, and more often than not, he would find a way to help. The village respected him, not because he was rich, but because he was kind in a way that cost him something. His kindness was real. Ada's mother was the quiet strength behind poor Elijah. She was a gentle woman who hummed while she cooked, who braided Ada's hair every Sunday morning, and who taught Ada that a woman's worth was not in how pretty she looked but in how strong her heart was. Those were good years. Ada would sit in the shop with her mother, watching how she greeted every customer with a smile, how she counted change carefully, how she never made anyone feel small even when they could barely afford what they were buying. Ada was learning without even knowing she was learning. She was absorbing her parents like a plant absorbs sunlight. Then her mother got sick. It happened slowly at first, a cough that would not go away, a tiredness that rest could not cure, and then it happened fast, the way sad things sometimes do. One morning, Ada woke up and her mother was gone. She was 9 years old. Poor Elijah sat outside the house for 3 days without eating. Ada would bring him food and sit beside him, and he would put his arm around her, and they would both be quiet together. The grief was too big for words. It filled the house like water fills a jar, completely, with no empty space left. It was during this broken season that a woman arrived. Her name was Mama Oge. She came into their life softly, the way a shadow enters a room, you do not notice it at first, and then suddenly everything is darker and you cannot remember when the light left. She was polite. She cooked well. She listened when Pa Elijah spoke, nodded at the right moments, smiled at Ada carefully. She seemed to understand their pain. She seemed to want to help. Pa Elijah, lonely and hurting, let her in. And with her came her daughter, Sonia, a girl Ada's age, with sharp eyes and a slow smile that never quite reached those eyes. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to become cruel. It happens in small steps, so small that by the time you see what is happening, it is already too late. Mama Oge's changes were small at first. She rearranged the kitchen. She started buying different things from the market without asking Pa Elijah. She began speaking for the household in conversations with neighbors, answering questions before Pa Elijah could open his mouth. These things seemed minor. Pa Elijah was tired and sick by this point. His health had begun to fail around the same time as his business troubles. The farm had suffered 2 bad seasons in a row. His shop was losing money because he had taken out loans to help others and the money had not returned. He was not broke, but he was weakened. And a weakened man, Mama Oge had learned, could be slowly moved aside without him even noticing. Ada noticed, though. Children notice everything. She saw how Mama Oge's voice changed when Pa Elijah was not in the room. It became harder, sharper, like a knife that had stopped pretending to be a spoon. She saw how Sonia started walking around the house with a confidence that belonged to someone who owns a place, shoulders back, chin up, as looking at Ada as if Ada were furniture. The first time Mama Oge asked Ada to wash Sonia's clothes, Ada looked at her father. Pa Elijah rubbed his eyes tiredly and said, "Just do it, my daughter. Let there be peace." So Ada did it. She told herself it was just once. It was not just once. By the time Pa Elijah became bedridden, the household had already shifted completely. Mama Oge sat at the head of the table. Mama Oge controlled what was cooked and who ate first. Mama Oge had moved important papers from Pa Elijah's room into her own. Ada had been quietly moved from her bedroom, her real bedroom, the one her father painted yellow for her when she was 6, into a small mat near the kitchen. It happened gradually, with small excuses each time. Sonia needs space. You wake up early anyway to cook, so it's easier. Stop being dramatic, Ada. And because her father was weak and fading, and because Ada had no one else, she swallowed it. She swallowed it every single day. Pa Elijah knew. In his last clear weeks, he called Ada to his bedside and held her hand. His grip was weak but his eyes were serious. "Ada," he said slowly, "I made arrangements. For you. For this house. For your future." He coughed. "There is a man, Daniel. I helped him once. He is a good man. If things become too hard." He coughed again, longer this time. "Remember Daniel." Ada did not fully understand. She was too busy being scared of losing him. She pressed his hand and told him not to talk like that. 3 weeks later, Pa Elijah closed his eyes for the last time. And when he did, the house became a completely different place. The day after Pa Elijah was buried, Mama Oge changed completely and did not bother hiding it anymore. She walked through the house like a general who had just won a war. She called Ada into the sitting room while Sonia sat on the couch with her legs crossed, watching like it was entertainment. Mama Oge stood with her arms folded and said, "This house belongs to me now. Your father left it to me. If you want to stay here, you will work. You will cook, you will clean, you will run the shop, and you will bring everything home to me. If you do not like it, the door is open." Ada stood very still. Her chest was burning. But she had nowhere to go. She was 14 years old and had no relatives who were close enough or brave enough to stand against Mama Oge. So she nodded. And from that day, she became a servant in her own father's house. The fake will appear a week later. Mama Oge produced a document that she claimed Pa Elijah had signed before he died, leaving the house, the shop, and the farmland entirely in her name. Some villagers were suspicious. One old man named Boba Choku went to Mama Oge and asked questions, his voice polite but his eyes sharp. Mama Oge showed him the paper smoothly, answered his questions calmly, and then, very quietly, afterwards, made sure that Boba Choku's regular supply from the shop was reduced, delayed, made difficult. He never asked questions again. That was how Mama Oge operated. She didn't shout. She didn't fight. She controlled. And control, Ada was learning, was more dangerous than anger. 3 years passed. Ada turned 17. Every morning before sunrise, she woke up, built a fire, cooked breakfast, served Mama Oge and Sonia, washed the dishes, cleaned the house, and then walked to the shop. She spent the whole day there, greeting customers with a smile they did not know was painful, counting goods, recording sales, solving small problems, and then, as the sun went down, she walked home with the day's money and placed every coin into Mama Oge's waiting hand. She never complained out loud. She cried sometimes at night, quietly, so nobody would hear and mock her. But she never broke. There was something in her, something she had inherited from her father and her mother both, that refused to completely die. The only thing that kept Ada going was a name. A name her father had spoken in his last days, when his voice was barely above a whisper. Daniel. She did not know this man. She did not know what he looked like or where he was or if he even remembered her father. But she kept that name like a candle in her pocket, it's small, fragile, but still burning. He came on a Tuesday afternoon, when the heat was heavy and the shop was quiet. Ada was restacking some items on the shelf near the back when she heard the door. She turned to see a man, maybe in his early 30s, dressed simply but cleanly, with a traveling bag on his shoulder and eyes that were taking in every detail of the shop slowly, carefully. He looked like someone who was searching for something, though he hadn't said a word yet. Ada stepped forward with the automatic customer smile she had trained herself to give regardless of how she was feeling. "Welcome, sir. What can I help you with?" The man looked at her for a moment, just a moment longer than usual. Something moved in his eyes. He looked around the shop again, at the warm counter, at the old sign above the door with poor Elijah's name still faintly painted on it. Then he looked back at Ada. "Is this poor Elijah's shop?" His voice was calm but there was weight in it. Ada felt something tighten in her chest. "It was," she said carefully. "He passed away 3 years ago." The man nodded slowly. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My name is Daniel." Ada went completely still. The name landed in the air between them like something dropped from a great height. She searched his face. He had kind eyes, that was the first thing she properly noticed, behind all the shock. Tired, but kind. The kind of eyes that had seen hard things but had not let those things make them cold. "He mentioned you," Ada said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father mentioned you before he died." Daniel nodded again. He did not seem surprised. He seemed, if anything, like a man who had been carrying guilt for arriving too late. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner," he said simply. Those 5 words cracked something small open in Ada's chest. Nobody had said sorry to her in 3 years. She sold him a few small items. He was polite, paid fairly, and didn't ask too many questions. But before he left, he paused at the door and turned back. "How are things?" he asked. It was such a simple question. A question any customer might ask. But his eyes when he asked it were not the eyes of a customer. They were the eyes of someone who already sensed that the answer was not fine. Ada pressed her lips together and said, "We manage." He nodded once more and walked out into the afternoon sun. Ada stood at the counter long after he was gone, her heart beating in a strange and unfamiliar way, not with fear or sadness this time, but with something that felt dangerously close to hope. If your heart is already breaking for Ada, please subscribe and turn on notifications red heart because what happens next will completely change her life forever. Daniel had not come to the village by accident. He had come because something had been pressing on his heart for months. He had been building his business in the city, doing well, moving forward, but poor Elijah's face kept appearing in his mind at odd moments. On the morning of a successful deal, he would suddenly remember the old man's laugh. Late at night, reviewing accounts, he would remember the day poor Elijah handed him money with both hands and said, "Use this well, boy. And when you are able, help someone else the same way." He had tried to reach poor Elijah by message over the years, but the responses had become irregular and then stopped. When he finally got confirmation through an old village contact that poor Elijah had passed, something broke quietly inside him. And then the contact added one small sentence that stayed with Daniel for weeks: "The daughter does not look well." He spent his first 2 days in the village simply watching. He stayed in a modest room at a small guest house and moved around casually, asking friendly questions, buying things from different places, listening to what the villagers talked about when they thought no one important was listening. What he heard made his jaw tighten. People spoke about Ada in sad whispers. "Poor girl. She works so hard. That stepmother." And then the voice would drop lower. Nobody wanted to be the one who said it too loudly. But Daniel had enough. He heard about the shop. He heard about the house. He heard about the will. And with every piece of information, a clearer and darker picture was forming. On the 3rd day, he went back to the shop. This time, when he arrived, Ada was dealing with a difficult customer, a large woman who was insisting loudly that she had been given wrong change the previous week, though her claim made no mathematical sense. Ada was trying patiently to explain, her voice steady even as the woman grew louder. Then something happened. Daniel, who had a habit of low blood pressure from his years of overworking, felt suddenly dizzy. He leaned against the counter quietly, pressing his hand to his forehead. He did not want to make a scene. But Ada noticed immediately. She stopped mid-sentence, turned to the difficult customer and said firmly but politely, "I will attend to you again in just one moment, Ma." Then she guided Daniel to the small stool behind the counter, brought him water, and stood with her hand gently on his back until the dizziness passed. The difficult customer sputtered and then went quiet, as if even she recognized something important was happening. It was such a small act of kindness. Daniel looked up at Ada as he drank the water, and he saw her father in her face, not the features exactly, but the expression. The instinct to help before helping herself. The gentleness that did not disappear even in the middle of her own suffering. He swallowed hard and handed the cup back. And in that moment, Daniel made a decision. He was not here just to visit the memory of a good man. He was here to fight for the daughter that good man had left behind. Finding the truth about poor Elijah's estate was not going to be easy. But Daniel had not built a business from nothing by being afraid of difficult things. He started by speaking quietly with Baba Choku, the old man who had once asked questions about the will. It took 3 separate conversations before Baba Choku trusted him enough to speak freely. When he finally did, his voice was low and his eyes kept moving to the door. "That will," Baba Choku said, "did not feel right. Poor Elijah was a man who loved his daughter above everything. I knew him for 30 years. No man like that signs everything away from his own blood." He paused. "But Mama Oge is not a woman you challenge without evidence. I tried. She squeezed me quietly until I stopped." He shook his head slowly. "Find the lawyer." Before he died, poor Elijah used a lawyer from the next town. A quiet man. Mr. Ose. If there is a real will somewhere, that man has it. Daniel traveled to the next town and found Mr. Ose, a thin, elderly lawyer with round spectacles and a filing system that filled every corner of his small office. When Daniel mentioned Paul Elijah's name, the old man went very still. He looked at Daniel carefully for a long time, then said, "Who sent you?" Daniel told him everything, who he was, how Paul Elijah had helped him, what he had found in the village. Mr. Osei sat back in his chair and was quiet for a very long time. Then he reached into a locked drawer, slowly, and placed a sealed envelope on the table between them. "Paul Elijah came to me 6 weeks before he died," Mr. Osei said quietly. "He was already unwell. He told me he was afraid of what would happen to Ada. He updated his will that day. Everything, the shop, the house, the land, he left to Ada. Legally, properly, with witnesses." He looked at Daniel steadily. "I sent a notice to the household after he died. It was ignored. Then someone came to see me, a woman who told me not to interfere. I am a coward," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "I was afraid. I kept the document but I said nothing." Daniel returned to the village with a copy of the real will and fire in his chest. But he moved carefully. Mama Oge was not a woman who would simply step aside. He needed more than a document, he needed witnesses, he needed people who would stand up and speak, and he needed to make sure Ada was protected before the confrontation happened. He spent several more days quietly building this network. He found 2 of Paul Elijah's former business partners who had suspected wrongdoing. He found a young man who worked at a government land records office who confirmed that the property registration had been tampered with. And he found Boba Chaku, who, now that Daniel was standing beside him, found courage returning to his old bones. All this time, Daniel said nothing to Ada directly. He did not want to raise her hopes before he was certain, and he did not want Mama Oge to sense that something was moving. So he continued to visit the shop casually, as a regular customer. And every time, he watched Ada, her patience, her quiet dignity, her refusal to let cruelty make her bitter, and it gave him more and more fuel. There was a justice that needed to happen here. Not just for Ada. For Paul Elijah. For every person that man had ever helped who never got the chance to help him back. The morning everything changed was ordinary in its beginning, which is often how the most important mornings are. Ada had woken before sunrise as always, made the fire, cooked, served, cleaned, and gone to the shop. It was mid-morning when Mama Oge arrived at the shop unexpectedly, something she rarely did. She stood in the doorway with Sonia beside her, looking around the shop with ownership in her eyes the way she always did, as if the walls and shelves and even the air belonged to her. She had come to collect money early, she said. She eyed the small number of customers in the shop and sniffed. "You are too slow," she told Ada loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You don't work hard enough. Your father built something good here and you are letting it fall apart." A woman buying soap looked away in discomfort. An old man at the back of the shop stared at the floor. Ada pressed her lips together and said nothing. She had learned, over the years, that silence was the only answer that did not cost her more pain. Then Daniel walked in. He was not alone. Behind him was Boba Chaku, walking slowly but with his head raised. Behind them were 2 other men whom the village recognized, Paul Elijah's old business partners, men who had been quiet for too long. And behind all of them, quietly, was Mr. Osei, the lawyer, wearing his old suit and carrying a flat leather folder pressed under his arm. The shop suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Mama Oge turned to face them. Her eyes moved across each face rapidly, calculating. Sonia gripped her mother's arm. "What is this?" Mama Oge said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. Daniel stepped forward. He did not shout. He did not perform. He simply spoke in a clear, calm voice, the voice of a man who has prepared for something for a long time. "My name is Daniel. Paul Elijah was my mentor and my father in every way that mattered. I have spent the past weeks investigating what happened to his estate after his death. Today, I am here to correct what was done wrong. He nodded to Mr. Ose, who opened the leather folder and stepped forward, placing the original will onto the shop counter, the real one, with poor Elijah's signature, dated and witnessed and completely legal. This, Daniel said, is poor Elijah's real and final will. Witnessed by 2 people. Signed before a licensed lawyer. In it, he leaves everything, this shop, the house, the farmland, to his daughter, Ada. Mama Oge moved fast. She stepped toward the counter and reached for the document. But Boba Chaku was faster. He placed his hand flat on top of it. Not this time, the old man said, his voice steady as stone. Mama Oge's face shifted through several emotions, fury, calculation, fear, and then settled into something cold. That paper is a lie, she said, turning to the customers who had gathered, frozen. He is trying to steal from me. I am a widow. I am a grieving woman and they are attacking me. 1 or 2 people shifted uncertainly. Mama Oge had played this game before. She knew how to make herself the victim. She knew how to make others doubt. But this time, there were too many voices. And the truth had too many witnesses. Mr. Ose spoke with the quiet authority of a man who had carried guilt long enough and was finally setting it down. He explained the document thoroughly, the date, the witnesses, the registration number, the legal process. He explained how he had been present when Pa Elijah signed it, how the man had been weak in body but completely clear in his mind that day. He said to me, Mr. Ose told the room, his voice slightly unsteady, that Ada was his reason for everything he had built. That every piece of land, every plank of that shop, was her inheritance. He said, and I wrote this down in my own handwriting, make sure she is never left without a foundation. The shop was completely silent. Somewhere near the back, one of the women customers began to cry softly. Ada stood very still at the corner of the counter, her hand pressed against her mouth. Then poor Elijah's first business partner, a man named Mr. Festus, spoke. He was big, broad, with white in his hair and sorrow in his face. He had known poor Elijah for 20 years. I was afraid, he said plainly, addressing the crowd. Mama Oge is not a simple woman. When I heard about the wish she produced, I had questions. But I had a family to protect. I stayed quiet. He straightened himself. I am not staying quiet today. Poor Elijah was the most honest man I knew. He would never leave Ada with nothing. I am standing here to say, that other will is a forgery. I never signed it as a witness, but my name was written on it. My signature was copied. I am prepared to stand before any authority and say that. A murmur went through the room. Mama Oge's face had gone pale. And then Sonia did something nobody expected. She had been standing behind her mother throughout, silent and tight-faced. But as the room shifted, as voices rose in support of Ada, as the evidence stacked up clearly, as even people who had been afraid began nodding and stepping forward, something broke in Sonia. She stepped away from her mother. Just one step. But it was enough. Mama, she said. Her voice was strangely small. Mama Oge turned to her sharply. Mama, stop. Mama Oge's eyes flashed with warning. But Sonia's next words fell like stones into still water. I saw you change the papers. I was young. I didn't understand fully. But I saw you. I was there. The silence that followed was the loudest silence Ada had ever heard in her life. Mama Oge tried one last time. She raised her voice, accused everyone, called it a conspiracy, pointed at Daniel and called him a criminal who had come to destabilize a widow. But it was the kind of noise that was already too late, the noise of a wall that has already cracked and is falling, still making sound but no longer holding anything up. The proper authorities were contacted that same week. The original will was verified by higher legal process. The property records that had been tampered with were examined and corrected. Mama Oge and Sonia were removed from the house. And Ada, who had slept near the kitchen fire for 3 years, who had given away every coin she earned, who had cried into silence every night and never stopped whispering, "Papa, help me." Ada walked through the front door of her father's house and stood in the sitting room, alone, for a long time. She ran her fingers across the old furniture. She looked at the walls. She walked to the back of the house where the kitchen was and stood in the doorway, looking at the small mat where she used to sleep. She did not cry. She had expected to cry. Instead, she felt something very deep and very quiet settle inside her, like a river that had been fighting against rocks for a long time and has finally found open water. Daniel was waiting outside, leaning against the fence, giving her space, the way a person does when they understand that some moments belong only to the one living them. When Ada finally came out, her eyes were dry and her chin was up. She walked to Daniel and stood in front of him. "Thank you," she said. Just those 2 words. He shook his head gently. "Your father thanked me first," he said. "A long time ago. I was only returning what I owed." The village talked about it for years afterward. About the girl who was forced to sleep in the kitchen while strangers took over her father's house. About the man who came back and refused to look away. About the daughter of the most honest man in the village, who held on to her dignity even when everything else was taken. Poor Elijah's shop was reopened properly under Ada's name. The farmland was reclaimed. And in the front room of her father's house, Ada placed one thing on the wall, not a decoration, not a painting, but a framed piece of paper with 3 sentences written on it in her own handwriting. "He built this. I almost lost it. I will not waste it." She opened the shop every morning at sunrise, just like her father had done. She never turned anyone away who came in need. And if you visited the village and asked about poor Elijah, people would smile and say, "You want to know about poor Elijah? Go to his daughter. She is exactly like him." And that was the highest honor of all. Thank you for watching Ada's emotional journey Red Heart. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, like, for more.